Recently, I've been watching some video from Eckhart Tolle. When we face a tragedy or difficulties beyond your control, what do? And obviously, that happens in life, and Eckhart Tolle has a way of processing it, and that I can relate to, but also want to go deeper in my own experience and go back to some of the references that I want to share. That's the background. So one of the example that I thought and I felt how Buddha may have felt, and I thought about it, is about the incident that was in the sutra. Don't remember the name of the sutra, but this is a case when the army of a competitor of the Shaka crown. Shaka is Buddha's kingdom, and he was the prince. But by this time, he had left the kingdom and went through his own path of enlightenment. And after that incident, I believe, he faced this issue of the army coming to the Shaka crown to conquer the nation. So there's a significant impact. I imagine that if I were in his shoes of Shakyamuni, the Buddha, how you deal with it. And his response to that was that as the army proceeded on the road toward the Shaka kingdom, he stood there in the middle of the road. And the army stopped looking at Shaka's or the Buddha standing there. And therefore he stood there and nothing happened. Maybe the army people respected Buddha and there was some presence and led them to think about what to do. And whatever the case was, they decided to be quiet. So the second day, Buddha stood there and nothing happened. The third day, Buddha stood there and the army remained calm and or just stayed there without proceeding, avoiding the conflict with the Buddha, maybe with some respect. And the fourth day, Buddha wasn't there. So the army proceeded and conquered the kingdom. So that's one story I remember, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 years ago, and I wondered what could be the case. So this response that Eckhart Tolle was giving related to 9/11 triggered me to think back about that story. And also what was going on was I was thinking about the word, thy will be done. And I'm convinced that's the way to go over the difficulties. Human has limitation. Thy will, if you call that is meaning God's will, or I tend to think of the law of nature, because everything is prevailing according to follow the law of nature. And if you go with the law of nature, instead of your thinking or whatever, that will fit to how the universe may operate. So I mentioned elsewhere, to know thyself is important, and that reach to the point of thy will be done. So when those two are aligned, you find a way. So the will of thy may represent the wisdom or compassion. That's the way I take it. So if I use that analogy, the idea in this case, Buddha's action represent the will of the universe, pointing probably, my guess, how many days he can sit there or stand there, or what can be done. It's like a Gandhi, Gandhi represented thy will be done in his way by fasting. And that moved the nation and the change in the governance in India. So that's one way, but in this case, the Buddha's way, he didn't do fasting. This is just anecdote. The truth may be not known, but still, that puzzled me what that action was. So, remembering that, my take was, and still is to a degree, what he did means that there's no use of fasting or sitting or waiting or facing the army on the road forever. So he chose the path which could be seen as the wisdom that he found in his case. And my interpretation of that is that the people we have around the world, we have ignorance, um, aversion, and greed. We have those delusionary thought, and it's endless. And the way to handle is not sit or fast in this case, but for him to eat and have the energy to share what he thought he can share, which is insurmountable task to face the person with greed or aversion or ignorance. How do you deal with it? But I took that was his case, and he delivered the message in his life. When I listened to Eckhart Tolle, I don't know how much depth he went through it to resolve that issue of him overcoming the difficulty or the face and tragedy felt at 9/11. That was a case of things happened and how to recover and do. And he kept on doing the sermon or the retreat for, I think, 5 days or so at the Omega Institute. That's I found in the YouTube the other day. So each case is different. Buddha, Eckhart Tolle, Gandhi. And what about me? So anecdote and the story is to inspire others to get the message and find their way, depending upon the situation they're all in. And as a person, I have difficulties, and I felt something happen recently, and that triggered me to think of how to deal with it. And I have my answer, which is basically acceptance and move on. Whatever I can, the best I can. Otherwise, no use of my will and energy put in the direction where the future is unknown, and what's the point of it? So those examples, Buddha, Gandhi, Eckhart Tolle, in my case too, facing the difficulty of what we do. So separately, back to the title idea about thy will be done, because that's the way I see the wisdom, what to do, the action we can take, the idea of that may come as wisdom if we stay quiet, accept, then the will of the universe may reveal. It may take time, it may take lots of thinking, but thinking doesn't go deeper, so you just accept empty-minded. In the case of unknown or difficulties that we may face. So what does that mean in relation to the phrase "thy will be done"? My take is that that's the eternal process of finding the wisdom, not from your small existence, but representing the will of the universe, so to speak. For that to be revealed, we need to accept everything. Unknown future, unknown scenario, unknown reason of what happened, because it's endless process of the karma and whatever may trigger the people to move in certain direction, because the nature you don't have to argue, but the people has to play with their mind that may come up with delusion and difficulties, and then when you face that, that's the point. One answer is go into the mountain and become hermit, but I think Tolle was mentioning about that. That's one point, but there's an interface with the society that we may live and we may wish to live to search for the solution. So, okay, the bottom line. I felt the bottom line of the story, which is connecting to this Buddha's standing on the road and leaving after 3 days of standing, representing the difficulties we face, is that we have a will as in each individual and the passion that we can come with it to pursue whatever meaningful path that we want to find in living our life, dealing with the situation. But that will has to be based upon not my personal experience of limited, exposure in this life, because that could be twisted, but I can try to do, but ultimately we have to let go my will, but thy will, or the will of the universe, to prevail. And that would happen in my understanding of belief, or beyond my consciousness, but the deep, down deep, universal consciousness, so to speak, to depend on it, to rely on it, to have myself aligned to that. And the way of finding that thy will, in the case of Buddha, maybe meditation. In the case of Christ, maybe, I'm not quite sure about the depth of his process or sacrifice, maybe a representation to die and to be reborn. And in that rebirth is the will of the universe. Sacrifice yourself, your entirety, or in my case, I'm still alive, so sacrifice my ego. Or Buddha's case, not dying in that instance, but giving up whatever he could and let the wisdom to reveal. And each case may be different, but that's the way to face the difficulty, accept the reality as we see it the best we can, and let go of your mind and go deep into your consciousness, endless depth, abyss. And the analogy I often think is the wave and ocean. The ripples in the mind can react to the event and move around, but the depth of the motion, as if the core of the universe or the law of the universe, which is prevailing in what we do in living, because that's the way I see it. We're living by the will of God, the will of the universe, the law of the nature prevailing. This miraculous event of life happened, and therefore, not you, but your existence based upon that. And that is the foundation, which is the ocean, endless, void, emptiness, no mind. The universe start with and end with and proceed with no mind. But there's will, whatever happens, and if you align to that, you get the wisdom, so to speak. Wisdom may be non-action. Through non-action may come with the wisdom. So it may sound odd, but that's my take, and that's how I felt about the word "that will be done." This is 15 years ago, so after my awakening experience, that's explained and capture the essence of it, whether it's Zen or Buddhism or Christianity, whatever, because we have that principle of how the universe functions. And there's the impermanence, suffering, ignorance, greed, whatever pops up, that represent the will of the universe, but that also represent the wisdom to go with it. So it's the flip side of the coin. Things happen, it may be sin and suffering, but there's something in there as a nature that is unavoidable of our own ignorance, of egocentric way, whatever there is, because that's what it is, that's manifesting, and then that down deep, and there's no we, but that's the law of nature, that's prevailing, so we need to connect to that. And to be able to connect, there shouldn't be we, us, me, ego. You have to melt into the law of nature prevailing. And that's the death and rebirth of Christ, or that's the way of Buddha talking about ignorance to find the wisdom to live. Thank you. May all beings be happy. Happy in the sense of be with the law of nature. Thy will be done.